the MessianTics podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Hey everybody, and welcome to today's episode of MessianTics. This is myself, Rabbi Jonathan, Rabbi Eric, Rabbi David, and Rabbi Toby. And this week we're going to have a continuation of the conversation we were having the last week, where we were discussing what are some things we can look to the church world for as examples of things to do. You know, what are the mutual what kind of mutual beneficent relationships can we form and develop with churches? Because we kind of talked about some things that the church world does right in a lot of cases, but we never really we didn't get as deep as I think we wanted to on forming other relationships and of course some other things that the church world just has had time to flesh out and do well, such as governing structures. That's one thing that has always been kind of important, is because a lot of the issues that we face, and not just within Messianic Judaism, but within many of the varying belief systems that become too solo, become too one pastor driven, one leader driven. A lot of the issues that they find themselves in are things that can be alleviated if done right by having an above structure, an overhead, if you will. And so I want to kick us off with that today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we talk about this that we have to acknowledge that within the church world there's basically two sides. There's the more independent, more self-governing, more lack of accountability to an outside body part, and then there's the more structural, denominational part of that. And I think that in the Messianic movement, we largely lean to kind of a midway. We have organizations like the IAMCS or like the UMJC that are a governing structure that exists, but each of the congregations is independent and largely driven by the charisma, ability, and talent of that leader. And in some ways, the ability, talent, and charisma of the leader then gives that leader authority within the movement. Oh, he's got a large congregation, or he's got a large following or a large platform, so he must be somebody we should emulate or follow after.
He's willing to say controversial things, so maybe we should.
So those things are. So there is that aspect. But when we look in the scriptures, in the verses that we tend to avoid talking about, for instance, most of the epistles were written because there was a problem in a body somewhere, in a congregation somewhere, and Paul's response was the governing response to that problem. There was accountability established that started in Jerusalem. Even Paul went back to Jerusalem, and there he obeyed the leadership in Jerusalem about how to solve a problem that was involving him. People were claiming he was teaching the Jews in the diaspora not to obey the Torah. They had a discussion. They told him what to do. He went and made sacrifices and paid for the offerings and sacrifices for some other men to break their vow. And so he followed the established leadership's directives to handling a problem that was going on. And unfortunately, because we don't have that kind of a structure where there's a natural, organic involvement of an up and a down, we end up largely waiting until there's a crisis that's so large and so damaging that it's unmanageable before we actually get people involved to deal with whatever the crisis is. Where if we were more involved in each other's lives in a ecumenical way, we could deal with issues before. For instance, and this isn't knocking either organization, But just a few years ago, we went through COVID, and there wasn't a rabbi that I know of that wasn't going through some kind of either depression or stress-related thing.
Some fiscal crisis,
deaths in their community. All of that hit very strongly and very hard on every one of us. But there really wasn't a mechanism within either organization that we're a part of to contact, say, hey, Rabbi David, you just wanted to check on you, see what's going on. Or even a mechanism that would be, hey, I've seen that you, for instance, at our synagogue, we lost 11 key people in a very short period of time. It would have been nice to have somebody call me and say, hey, Rabbi Eric, I know your congregation's going through a big ordeal, a lot of loss, a lot of emotional things going on. What we'd like to do is send a couple of our rabbis in to cover your service for a couple of weeks and let you just take a break, and maybe you can come visit one of us and just get out of the bima, so that you can shore up your spiritual underpinnings, so that you can continue going on. And so I know there are several rabbis or who people were rabbis that are no longer rabbis, because it was so overwhelming to deal with what went on over those years that they just couldn't do it. And their congregations closed because of COVID, and there were financial things, and they lost buildings and all of this going on. In a similar fashion, last year we had the hurricanes that came through. And while there were moves to assist financially and support, I don't know that there were moves to spiritually and emotionally support. And Rabbi David, you can answer that question a little better, because your congregation, was it 5 years ago now?
Yeah, it was Hurricane Sally.
Hurricane Sally came and destroyed your building,
September
and
20,
your whole building had to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
Well, that's a devastating event for a leader. It's also unsettling for the congregation members, because what are we going to do next week? Where are we going to meet? How are we going to do this? Everything suddenly and dramatically changes. If there was more of a structure involved to connect with leaders, where the hierarchy of the organization took a responsibility, and again, we're not saying this to bash anybody, but to encourage the involvement, or maybe to encourage a move towards a more involvement in a unified body or group, rather than just sub congregations that join together for certain events, but not for. How did you deal with all that? And were people, it happened and I'm not aware.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it from a couple of different angles. First, the financial side. One of the organizations that we're a part of very quickly sent a decent check that helped cover some of the cost that was associated with what was going on with our building. Thankfully, we found out the hard way, but in a good way, that our insurance was way better than we ever expected it was. And so our deductible was a lot lower than we were afraid. We were thinking we were looking at $25,000, $30,000 deductible. Right. It ended up being $5,000.
Oh, wow.
There was no way we would have known that looking at the documentation until it happened. And our insurance guy was like, hey, so good news. But one of the organizations, as an organization, sent us a check that made a huge difference. The other organization, individual congregations, sent some financial resources to be a blessing. One congregation in particular called me up and said, hey, we want to pay your deductible, whatever it is, let us know, and we'll send a check to cover the deductible. So individual congregations and the other organization helped out independently, and the one organization helped out actively. As far as the spiritual side of it goes, I had people that would contact and check in on us to see how the construction was going, see how things, but it wasn't so much a, hey, how are you doing spiritually? Because, I'll be perfectly honest, and Rabbi Toby and I talked about this quite a bit over the course of the year or so. It took 10 months to get back in our building, but over the course of the year or so, dealing with all of this. And when the hurricane first hit, it was so bad in our area that like we couldn't get out of our neighborhood for almost a week. We didn't have power for most of that week. And so I found out about the damage to our building because a congregant that lived around the corner drove by and saw, and so he went into the building, it was a key holder, went into the building and saw the rain in the building and the flooding in the building and all this, and called me up to let me know about it. That was how I found out about it. What was really interesting, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying in a previous episode, dealing with like mutual benefit relationships between Messianic Judaism and the church, is, to be honest, the best contacts that I had in all of this was actually from churches in our area that we have intentional relationships with. Within an hour of me finding out about the damage to the building, I had 5 churches that we have relationship with that have reached out to us and said, we have space, whatever you need, as long as you need, you let us know, we've got you covered. And one of those ended up being an ideal fit for us, and so we were able to be in one of the church's kind of old sanctuary that they use as like a chapel for 10 months consecutively. They wouldn't let us pay anything, but all of those pastors on a regular basis would reach out and check in and see how we were doing, pray for us, and so on. We got the regular "I'm praying for you" kind of contacts and emails from people in the organization, but there wasn't a lot of like hands-on relational, we're concerned about your spiritual walk and life and the stress and all of this and what have you. That there wasn't a lot of that. And again, like Rabbi Eric said, that's not to bash or to complain. These are things that honestly, as a whole, could be better, and you honestly don't even really think about what could be improved until there's a need for improvement. And I think that's, honestly, I think that's one of my primary issues, having grown up in the movement, with some of the way we tend to do things, is we do tend to be reactionary rather than proaction, right? So in these organizations, it would be phenomenal. Now, in the UMJC, we do have Rabbi Resnick, who in several situations in the last couple of years has intentionally called me up. He's the rabbinic council. His kind of function in the union is to be spiritual care and pastoral role for the leaders in the UMJC and such, and for the individual congregations. And so Russ Resnick was a phenomenal blessing in a couple of different situations in the last year and a half, 2 years of our congregational life, because he would actively call and check in and see how we were, and pray for us and ask what he could do for us or whatever. Within the IMCS, I've got a lot of really close friends in the IMCS, and individually they would call and check and such. But as an organizational representative, I don't think I ever got any kind of communication at all. Not a, what can we do? Not a, what do you need? Not a, how can we pray for you? And especially not a, can we fill your pulpit for a week or two to let you kind of think and revive?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been, again, these are things that we're thinking about, that we look at. The IMCS and the union, neither one are functionally set up to provide that kind of a resource. And that's not it's because that's just not how it was designed. It's not the way it's set up. So that's not, again, bashing them. I will say that Rabbi Carlson was good about communicating, calling, checking, and that's great, and I appreciate that. There's really nothing that helps more than somebody who just calls and says, "Hey, I want to check on you." Yeah. In a lot of ways, that's really important, because
otherwise you just feel forgotten.
But structurally, I think that there's things that, for instance, my administrator died during COVID. Immediately a rabbi called me and said, "Hey, I'm coming down this weekend. There's no way you should be speaking this weekend with this going on. I'm going to fly down. I'm going to be there." That was so meaningful to have somebody take that weight off at that moment, at that time, to do that without us having to think, what can I do? How do I get this to happen? In moments like that, your mind isn't functioning in a way where you can logistically work out those details. So having people that'll step in and say that. In the same way, we have people that are going through health crisis, people that they've got cancer, they've got different things they're dealing with, people going through family crisis. just all kinds of things going on, and it would be really nice. And the truth is that some of the denominational churches are much more structurally prepared for those kind of situations. They have presbyteries that are set up in regions that their whole purpose is to go visit, to care for, to meet with the people, to get to know the people in their communities, that their full-time job is to travel around from community, congregation to church, congregation to congregation, intermingling with the body and connecting it. And I'm not necessarily saying we need to have that, but I think that because there's issues with the other end of that also, but having people that are purposefully involved in, because it's easy, and let me say this in a way that I'm not diminishing the value of a gift or a check or but it's easy to write a check for a couple $1,000 or $500 or $100 and say, okay, I've done my part. I've been there. I did something. I can check off that check on my list of having been involved and stood with my brother. But to actually get in your car and drive over, or to send somebody to go pick somebody up, or an airline ticket, or whatever it takes at that moment to get the person out of that earthquake, at least temporarily, because it's in those moments when crisis is going on where it's so easy to say something inappropriate, to act out of anger or fear or even jealousy. I mean, King David looked around at the world, and his world was kind of falling apart, and he looked at all the ungodly and he said, God, why are you blessing the ungodly? And I'm struggling. Here I am serving you. There's moments in our life where we look around, and I'm sure there was times where you looked around your building, and we had hurricane damage in our building, and it was like, well, Lord, I can give you a list of congregations that deserve to be taken out. And here, and I mean, just when we're thinking with our humanity and with our... Yeah.
Well, I mean, visible success is meant, I learned a long time ago, because, I mean, we all do that. But I read this blog post, and I don't remember who wrote it, which is fitting, because God didn't want him to have credit. But he said, to anyone who is jealous or sees someone who you think should be taken out or whatever, or whenever you struggle in that area, or whenever you get too obsessive about visible success, keep in mind that King Saul won every single battle except the last one, and that's the one where he fell on his own sword. He won every single recorded military engagement. Saul. And then the last one. I mean, so I try to remember that every time I get kind of in that mindset. It's really easy to do.
Yeah.
But that's something that I try to keep in mind. And for me, when I think about the movement compared to the church, I think that there are some things the movement can control that are its fault for why it struggles with the stuff it struggles with. And some of it isn't. I think some of it is because the church is more prolific and numerous. You can drive down a street. The church just is more... there's just more churches. Mm-hmm. And Messianic Judaism is based in Judaism, which started with the Jewish people, and there are very few of them. You'll be hard-pressed to find in South Dakota or in Wyoming a Gentile that, unless God appears to him, I'm not putting that out. He does all the time. He appears to people and does crazy stuff. But most of the time when you think of a Gentile believer who's going to plant something, it's going to be a church. Unless they've gotten some revelation, So what I think that creates is a lack of financial resources to do that. And I think it creates a natural disconnection. We're sprawled out. because you could probably go to a church here in Pensacola and probably walk and find another one. Whereas here, we drive, if I were to drive from Bridom to CMC, it would be almost an hour. So I think that's part of the reason why there's that struggle, and there's a temptation to feel like you're drifting on your own, like you're you're an island.
Yeah, and even here, there's more Messianic synagogues in within an hour of each other in this area than most. The only other place that's as populated with Messianic synagogues is Central Florida.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of diagnoses. It's like if the Messianic movement was a patient on a hospital bed, I would have a few things to write down. But I think some things it's just you were kind of born like this. There's not a lot of Jewish people, and there's a lot more churches, and these are things you just kind of can't help, But then there would be the other things. I'd be like, but I see here where Judaism itself is an insular religion, closed religion. You said that in one of your teachings, Rabbi David, so important. Messianic Judaism is not trying to be Judaism. It is Judaism. But I think when we get away from the Great Commission that Yeshua said we're supposed to do, Judaism, even Messianic Judaism, finds itself going back to, or having a tendency to go back to what it's always known, which is to stay closed and to make it incredibly hard for lay people to have any mobility and leadership and things like that. That's difficult. Listen, I can't say it. I can't say it because it's recording but I'm just saying, it's fun to talk about having conferences, and we're going to get together for leadership things, and we're about training and this, that, and the other. And those people go that conference or whatever you want to call it ends, and they go back and nothing changes for them. And that's another problem in the church. It is very easy to work hard, be faithful, and have mobility. You can sit in a Messianic congregation or be in this movement for years and never go anywhere. I have friends who became disillusioned because they felt called to do something and never got tapped for it. And then you're getting into what I think is another diagnosis.
Yeah, well, and some of it I think is that Messianic Judaism in other places is, and I don't want to use the word sexier in that term, in that way, but if you're talking about the Ethiopians in Africa, mm-hmm. and you can say, well, we need to build wells, and we need to do this, and we need to do that, so let's send hundreds of thousands of dollars to help those congregations. If you're talking about Israel, there's groups both within Messianic Judaism and traditional Judaism and Christianity that raise millions and millions of dollars to help Israel. And we have for Ukraine and those areas. But half of the Jews in the world, almost just short of half, still live in the United States. But there's no mechanism, because it's not sexy to donate money to congregations in the United States. There's no zing to it. Nobody's doing commercials on TV to say, hey, let's share the good news with the Jewish people, and let's get non-Jewish people together, and let's build this one in Messiah thing that we talk about, and let's do this. So our resources are short.
Yes.
And so there's that. There's also the lack of mobility. As you said, in a lot of ways, we have the same group of people that are doing things, and those people are gifted and talented and able and all the things, but we need to do something to open doors for other people to come in, regardless of their age. There are people that get called to serve in ministry at 60, and there needs to be opportunities for those people, regardless of whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish. Those kind of things are there. And having a more centralized organization would, because here the truth is, we have two congregations. your congregation and our congregation, Maimchaim and Bradam, and we're in the same region of the country. So both of us are vying for the same resources. So, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to somebody and saying, hey, give $1,000 to this, and you're doing something. You might go to the same person and say, give $1,000 to this, where the reality is if we went together and said, give $1,000 and we'd both benefit from this, we could accomplish more instead of trying to remake the wheel or do everything ourselves or accomplish everything on our own. We could actually resource together. In the same way, it frustrates me, and this is just my frustration speaking, is that we have, I think there's 6 different college programs for Messianic leadership. But we don't have enough students
for 6 different
colleges to raise Messianic leaders up.
Yeah.
We would do so much better to take all the resources that we're putting into 6 different programs and have one program that did it, and it did it well and accomplished the purpose and use resources a little better to do so.
Yeah.
And so those are things that I think that that we could do better structurally, organizationally. We could accomplish more with less if we worked together and held hands as we did it, rather than fighting for the same resources so that we can. In Israel, there are so many organizations that do humanitarian aid that are fighting for the same resources, so they each can have a warehouse, so they each can have this, so they each can have trucks, so they each can do this. Where if we were to pull resources together, and some of them are trying to do this, and I appreciate like the Joseph Project that works across lines and organizations and structures to do that, and they have warehouses all over Israel that work together. But there's a lot of other groups that are vying for the same resource. Instead of saying, hey, you're doing this well, let's work together to accomplish this. And the same thing with other things, which is, again, why I think having some kind of a unified structure to assist in everything. And another thing that it would be judicially, to where if somebody did something that was untoward, that there would be a unified judicial process that would handle those things and then be agreed to. In other words, the union, the IMCS, the other organizations that are kosher, that are teaching gospel, good news, the balanced biblical thing, say, okay, this is our judicial body. For those things that are too large to handle in-house, we're going to have these people that are both legally minded and spiritually minded to handle this, and their governance is then going to be a determination that covers all this. So you don't have somebody who gets in trouble in one organization because they did something wrong, it gets put out, and then they go into another organization and start over without any oversight or anything because they're not communicating together. And these things, counseling, judicial things, resources, all that, I think we could do a better job if we were working together. And I'm not saying do away with the different organizations, because I think there's reasons to have both the union and the IMCS and other functioning organizations. But I think there's some things that those organizations can pull resources on to accomplish things together. And one of those things is caring for each other, caring for our leaders. Like I said, there's times where we need, and the truth is that most of the leaders within our movement that have fallen into sin fell into sin because something crisis-wise happened in their world. There was nobody there ministering, healing, and all to them in those moments, and it opened up a door to moral failure. And then because they failed morally, we then kicked them out of whatever ministry they're doing, and now they just snowballed. So now they not only failed morally, but they also are failing financially. Their families are falling apart. They're losing their homes. They're losing their car. They're starting some kind of secular job to try to survive. And all of that could have been mitigated if we had gotten involved before those things happen.
Sooner.
One of the things that I think would be beneficial here, and this again leans on the fact that we're playing off the idea of, like, often we look at Messianic Judaism and the church as being opposite each other, contrary to each other, competition with each other, us versus them, when that's really not supposed to be the case, right? We recognize that Messianic Judaism and the church, though we do things different, we look different, we practice on different days, what have you, we are one and the same in the body of Messiah. We're part of the body of Messiah. And like we said in the previous episode, is we love as Messianic rabbis to be invited to speak in churches. But rarely do we invite pastors to speak in our congregations, and so on and so forth. There should be a mutual beneficiality to it. And to the degree of some of what we're talking about today, especially in spiritual care for leaders in difficult times, in figuring out how to better utilize, that's not the best term for it, but utilize individuals like Rabbi Toby was talking about that feel a calling on their life but can't find a avenue for mobility in the movement, in their local congregation, what have you. We could be very easily reaching out to, and I would suggest to denominational churches, this is not to crap on the non-denominational world either. There's a lot of good that can be gleaned from the non-denominational world, but denominationally structured church organizations tend to be very good at some of this stuff. And here's the thing, Messianic Judaism has been around for, as we know it, for 60, 70 years, give or take. We're very infantile in the conversation of the body of Messiah. We're very infantile. Just
time and experience.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the church has been doing some of this stuff for a very, very, very long time. And we could reach out to, for instance, as if you have an opportunity to be influential in your organization and whatever Messianic organization you're a part of, reach out to pastor friends that you have who are in various successful denominations and ask, hey, what do you guys do? How does your denomination operate in this area? When you have people that are going through hard times, difficult situations, loss of family, friends, close acquaintances, close friends, what have you. When you have somebody that has a significant loss in their congregation or take a significant destructive situation to their buildings or their homes or whatever, what does your organization, what does your denomination do for the spiritual care of that individual, of that leader? How does the organization step in? What are the pathways to open that conversation? If it's a younger individual or an individual in general that feels a calling on their life to be involved in ministry within a Messianic Jewish congregation, Messianic Judaism as a whole, we can reach out to church friends and go, hey, what do you guys do? How do you, recognize the calling in an individual's life? 2, how do you begin to foster and build that up locally? And 3, what do you do to begin to mobilize, or what is the mechanism that your organization uses to mobilize these individuals to be able to step into their calling, and so on and so forth? There's a lot of various avenues because, again, as we know Messianic Judaism today, very young, very infantile. The church has been around for a very long time, doing this for a very long time, and they're not always ideal or perfect at it, right? I mean, we can all think of easily one situation that a particular denomination has been really terrible at handling for a very, very long time and cover things up and so on. But aside from that, the church has been very, very good at a lot of this stuff for a very long time, and we could be blessed by understanding that the church has something to offer us just as much as we think we have something to offer them, and this is an area that we could benefit from.
Right, and one of the examples going along with what you're saying is, let's say a leader does have some kind of moral failure. Well, it may be that we establish a connection with some pastors who aren't in Messianic Judaism and let them help with the judicial aspect of what's going on, so that there's not favoritism, so that there's not, because I know that we tend to side with the leader. If if they're a friend of ours, we're going to look at it through the lens of friendship, relationship, of time, of all that. Yeah. Where if you take that out of the situation and have non-biased, uninvolved people, that's why the Supreme Court recuses itself from matters that they have personal connection with, so that there can be fair and just judicial things. So between different congregations, not just leaders who fall, but there's times where congregations have issues, where organizations have issues, where it's just good to have resources that are outside of the inner, that allow for those things to happen in a way that make it justice you shall seek.
I think I can give you, I think it's not the reason, but it's one of them. Messianic Judaism is young and infantile, the Messianic movement, but we have to keep in mind that Judaism is not infantile. So Messianic Judaism is a new movement operating with things that are very antiquated. Judaism's old, and I'm not knocking it for that. I'm just saying Messianic Judaism is new, but it's Judaism's really old, and there are some things that I think make that a problem when you consider Messianic Judaism trying to reach across the aisle to a pastor. So let's look at a rabbi reaching out to, like David says, well, we're happy to go speak to a pastor or at his congregation, but we don't invite pastors to our synagogues, and that is very true. It's a trend that is really, really, really overwhelmingly true. And I think that comes from Messianic Judaism's view of the rabbi versus church's view of the pastor, and Messianic Judaism's view of rabbi versus a pastor. There is this mystique, this antiquated mystique around the office of a rabbi that does not exist around a pastor. And if you go into the Gentile world, there are Gentiles that don't care if you're a pastor or not. Like a Gentile. Like if you're a pastor and you go into the grocery store, you could have somebody that just goes, oh, okay. Or if it's a priest wearing the collar, right, they could just see him and go, oh, I don't care. Because the Gentile, but you look in Jewish culture, and you could have a Jewish person in the supermarket, and they are 100% Jewish, but they 100% don't care about God, don't believe in the Bible, think it's a bunch of crap. But if rabbi walks in, there is a level of respect, because in Jewishness and in Jewish culture, it doesn't matter if they're religious or not. That's a rabbi. That doesn't exist in the Gentile world, and I think that Messianic Judaism has adopted some of that attitude because it is Jewish, and I think there's a little bit of a superior attitude there, because a pastor's here, but the rabbi is here. Yeah. And that comes from, I think, the antiquated mystique, the right, culture. Am I making sense?
Yeah, but some of it is also, and this is just from my own experience.
And I'm a rabbi talking, so I'm not knocking rabbis.
No, I'm saying from my own experience, sometimes we think, we have something to teach them.
Yes.
They don't have something to teach us.
No, because we have Jesus. Because all they have is Jesus. That's how they look at the church.
And so,
and we have
for
Jesus
instance,
and more.
I can give an example, and I've shared this before with, I know Rabbi Jonathan, Rabbi David. I don't know if Rabbi Toby was there or not. We went to a conference, an MLR conference years ago, Rabbi Jonathan Burness put on, and they had a Baptist seminary professor who was teaching homiletics, had to preach at this conference, and we walk in, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, what's this guy going to teach me? I'm not going to be a Baptist. I'm not giving 3 points and an opening 3 points and a closing. And what's he going to teach me?
We're rabbis. We teach. They preach.
Right.
There's even that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, what's this guy? Why can't they get a rabbi up there? Why don't we have a rabbi in the movement that can teach rabbis how to teach? Why do we have to go outside of Messianic Judaism to find someone to do this? Aren't our people good enough to do this? We're and that was my mindset. And then the guy taught, and while honestly I don't remember much of his homiletics class. And I don't know that I gained much from that. The fact that he taught from a position, teaching a lesson or a series on the Lucan authorship of the book of Hebrews. And his teaching changed fundamentally my understanding of the book of Hebrews, how it was written, who wrote it, and I was like, then I got angry because, like, why does this Baptist guy know this and none of us Messianic? There is almost an immaturity.
How dare he?
And how in the world did God reveal that to this peasant Baptist instead of us hierarchical Messianics?
They don't have Judaism. Yeah. How do they get that?
Of course, I wouldn't use hierarchical and Messianic Judaism in the same sentence.
It is the Judaism. I
meant more monarch.
No, I knew what you meant, but
I love Judaism, but God never intended for Judaism to be like, because you have this now you know everything, or because you're a rabbi and not a pastor, you have this mystique around
this
you.
aura.
It's very unhealthy.
So I had
magically have all the knowledge because you've got this honorific.
So I had to deal with and come to a place of repentance over my view of that. Likewise, somebody gave me a book written by Franklin Graham one time. And, gave me this book. I don't even remember what the name of the book was, but they gave it to me, and I was like, Franklin Graham. What's Franklin Graham going to do? So I put the book off to the side, and one day I was sitting in my office, and I saw the book, and I picked it up, opened it up, and I read the first chapter of it, and it was talking about Abraham and the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And it makes a statement that God said, I'll provide a lamb, but a ram was provided that day. And the Hebrew word for ram and lamb are completely different. And I went, wow, I'd never thought of that before. Now, of course, this has been a number of years ago when this happened, but it was part of this opening of my mind to understanding that it's not us and them, and that there's value in them that we need to participate in, and that God doesn't only reveal truth to Messianic Jews, and that, it's a different mindset. But if we would learn that, we could take advantage of the strength of the body rather than insulating ourselves as us against them. And then we wouldn't maybe be afraid to have a pastor come speak at our congregation because we'd actually trust that God would govern what was happening.
Here's a novel idea, and I'm just throwing this out there. How about we just pray and say, God, is this a good move to have, and trust God to do His thing, rather than, you know what I mean? Like, I think we get this, we forget that the same God that called us into our positions also has a desire to protect and nourish and care for our flock. And so if God puts something on your heart, or if there's something you're interested in and you seek God's guidance on it, and you're truly seeking it and listening, He doesn't fail. He's not going to drop the ball on you. Right. And so I think a lot of that distrust boils down to just spend some time in prayer. You know what I mean? Like, we've had, matter of fact, just last year, I think it was for the Southeast Regional, the MJ Southeast Regional Conference, Rabbi Toby and I were both going to be gone. And I actually reached out to a pastor friend of mine that I've done seders and stuff for. And I was like, hey, any chance you want to come and bless our congregation on such and such a date and be the speaker? I said, I'm not going to be there. I'm not only asking you because I'm not going to be there, but I want you to understand this is because I trust you.
Right.
I'm not going to be there, and I'm still offering the pulpit to you. You know, Rabbi Toby's talked about this before, that a lot of senior leaders, and I think it's probably the case in the church too with pastors, a lot of senior rabbis or founding rabbis or whatever are very big about they won't let somebody speak if they can't hear what they're saying. Or they'll only let them speak if they're going to be gone because they figure the crowd's going to be light and they're not going to care anyways.
Right.
Whereas I personally if we're inviting somebody to speak, I want to know that they're going to be a blessing to our community. And so I reached out and was like, look, I want you to understand, I trust you. I believe God has a calling on you, and I'd love for you to speak in my congregation. I'm not going to be there. I'm not only asking you because I'm not going to be there, but because I trust you. And our congregation, we got great feedback from it. There are a few people that was like, it would have been great if you went a little deeper, but nonetheless, everybody said they really were blessed by it and got a lot from it, which I think is good. Like, we should be able to.
In the same way, when we brought Rabbi Jonathan on as assistant rabbi, and he began teaching on Tuesday nights, I actually stayed away on Tuesday nights. Not because he couldn't teach me something, but because I didn't want the congregation not to get the respect for him by thinking I was there monitoring everything that he said.
Watching me see what's going on.
Watching and making sure just in case he dropped the ball, I could run in and grab it. I wanted them to have confidence in his ability to teach. Mm-hmm. And likewise, I have people that I bring in, and I'm not there to supervise. Now, excuse me, in another sense,
inquiring minds would like to know, was your staying home during Bible study also so you wouldn't get the urge to go, that was great, but
yeah, it is. the other side of that is that I enjoy, like I remember the very first time that Rabbi Jonathan spoke when I was at the synagogue and all, and I was able to actually go sit down by my wife.
Yeah.
And just be part of the congregation. There was something really special about just being released from the responsibility and allowing that
you
moment.
Didn't have to be up there.
Right.
Yeah, I love those weeks where Rabbi Toby's speaking and I don't have to.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but and again, these are things that we can, if we open up to the idea and the concept that there's value to other leaders, both within the Messianic movement and outside, that they should be involved in our life, that we should be a little more open about and more transparent about what we need, that there's times we should be the ones reaching out and saying, hey, I'm going through a stressful time. Can you come fill in for me? I got a phone call from a rabbi down in South Florida, and he said, hey, I'm going to be having surgery. Is there any way you can come down and fill in for me? And he reached out. It wasn't
right.
But those things are important to be able to, and not just because you're having surgery, but I'm just overwhelmed. I need a weekend off.
I want to hop on that for a second, because we have spent a significant portion of this episode talking about what the organizations could do better for us.
Right.
And whether you intended this or not, you actually bring up a really important point, which is that as leaders, we need to understand we're not Superman, right? And when people don't reach out to check on us, a lot of times it's honestly because they figure we're doing okay. If we weren't, we would say something.
Right.
And so we need to understand that there are times where when we're suffering, like, for instance, you said if we had some sort of like joint judicial thing where if somebody falls, whatever, we could avoid some of that, as you said, if we were involved in the individual's life, and when we see there's a moment of weakness, that we step in and hey, let me take your pulpit for a few weeks, let me stand in a minute.
Right.
But at the same time, when we're in those moments of weakness, a lot of times, because we're really good at putting on a show, like I find myself a lot of times at rabbis' conferences and stuff. Hey, how are things going to your conference? Oh, things are great. No major issues. No. While at the same time, I know there's actually issues that we're addressing, and I'm just not. We need to be honest about it. Hey, like when we had a significant loss in our congregation last January, and when that occurred, the first thing I did was I went to my dad and said, "Hey, Rabbi Toby and I can't speak this week." Neither of us, I think I was scheduled to, but I was like, we're not in the headspace to do that. I need you to come and speak, and it was able to work out. But we need to be willing to admit when we need help, and a lot of times as leaders, we just aren't willing to admit that. And I think part of it is the machismo, kind of a thing. Like we just, nobody needs to know we're hurting or we're failing or what. But we need to call people up, right? To say if more of us were calling into leaders in our organizations and going, hey, I'm having a difficult time right now. Can you help? Can you talk with me? Can you come down? Can somebody? I bet there would be more of a willingness on the organizational side to invest the energy and the resources to make those avenues available.
I don't even think it's so much of the time that people think, oh, no one's going to care, or I can grunt it out and just take it. But like this morning, we were talking about intercongregational crises, and I was like, I don't think most people realize when they're in crisis. Like, it's wonderful when they do. It's a very mature moment when people like realize, hey, I'm having a moment, I need help. But most people, I think, just by virtue of how we live life, I don't think most people realize they're in crisis when they're in crisis until it gets like real bad and they hit like a real obtuse part of that being in crisis. Most people just don't even realize it, and so they need those people around them who can help them kind of call it out. Say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be where you are right now. Let's see what we can do to help.
I never knew that I suffered from trauma and stuff from years back until a therapist told me, basically, she was like, let me give you a different way to think about this, and a different way to think about this, and a different way to think about this. And I'm kind of answering her questions, and she goes, that's trauma.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, man, that took me 40 years.
Yeah. Back when I was 38, which has been a long time ago, I was leading 5 congregations. I was Messianic congregations from Slida, Louisiana to Pensacola. My father died shortly after he was 38 years old. 5 of my close friends, who all were 38, died that year. I became so fearful of death that I would not leave my house except to go teach or speak. Like, I outwardly pretended like everything was fine, but inwardly I was fundamentally terrified to leave my house, that I was going to die, that I was going to get in a car accident, that something was going to happen, that I was going to have a heart attack, it was like 6 months of that. But I also didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Like I should have went to somebody and said, hey, can you help me with this? I need counseling. I need somebody to fill in. And so, like, I was traveling and preaching and doing, and I had people that drive me everywhere because I wasn't wanting to drive myself, and all that going on. And I was dealing with absolute terror. To the point where I wouldn't go out of my house, period. Unless I had to be somewhere to do my ministry, because I couldn't be missed. I needed to be there. I was too important to the congregation not to be there.
Huh? Too big to fail.
Too big to fail. Yeah. I was there, and I did, and thankfully God still anointed and still touched and still moved. But it was a terrible time in my life that I realized I was in crisis, but wasn't humble enough to reach out and ask for help. Now, thankfully, God took care of it, but He could have done it a much sooner, with much less issues and trauma to myself and others during that season.
I think something else the church gets really right, that would, I think, help us as a movement, is, in their unity. And again, the whole basis for what, because most people have no clue what drives the governance of churches, of congregations, of bodies, and really what drives a lot of them is the traditions that are handed down to them from previous years. But all of it's kind of rooted in Acts, where the apostles gather to handle a judicial issue, essentially. And their response is, it seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us that it is a unified decision, and they're going forward. And at that point, based on that decision, if you are no longer in agreement with this decision, you are no longer a part of us. You become something else. The church is really good about defining what it is it believes and that what it doesn't believe. And, Messianic Judaism, if we're honest, Messianic Judaism, if you go across the country and you ask, Messianic Jews, what do you believe? You'll get a different answer almost everywhere you go. And depending on who you ask in the different organizations, you'll get even different answers within the organizations.
Now, to be fair, on the basis, who is Messiah, things like that, you're going to get mostly. But when it talks about lifestyle observance, things like that.
There are other theological things that are, kind of, there's no settlement. They're kind of up for debate between the varying crowds. And so, I think we could avoid a lot of the issues that we have with the varying, what I'll call splinter groups. Hebrew Roots is one that we kind of gang up on most of the time. So my apologies. A lot of those things could be avoided if there was a choice to actually come together and answer those questions and actually live with the decision.
Right. And again, to just agree with you and go one step, is when they went for judicial opinion, they went to healthy, spirit-filled leaders who weren't involved in whatever was going on.
Right.
We tend to, when we go through a judicial process, many times we go to find judicial people that will take our side or agree with us, that are involved in whatever we're doing so that we get the result we wanted, rather than having a group of unbiased people that are spirit-filled, they're listening to the Spirit of God and how He directs, and they're spiritually healthy and mature themselves to give an answer. And that's why they could be an accepted decision by the body, because they knew it was going to be an unbiased, spirit-led decision that we can accept.
Right. And I think, again, kind of more looking inwardly, the longer we prolong the idea of it's down to the individual congregation, it's down to the individual rabbi. We talk about getting back to a more biblical way. That's just American materialism. It's I can shop for whatever rabbi I want. If I don't like the answers or teachings this rabbi gives, I can go online and I can follow the other rabbi, the other teacher. I can go and I can move states to a different congregation and be under this one because I prefer this stuff better, as opposed to you looking and having to embrace Messianic Judaism that says this is what we are and this is what we have to, this is what we and the Holy Spirit have decided going forward on this issue, and you either can be a part of that or you can be not a part of that, and then at that point it's up to you to be a schismatic or not. But that's one thing the church does well that I think we could look to as an example, that we do need to be unified. And so I love the different strengths that the different organizations have, and I think there's a place for there to be, those strengths can still exist, but at some point, not today, not tomorrow, and maybe not even in a few years, the barriers between the different organizations will have to come down, and you can have things can be a little bit different based on region, based on culture, political interpretation, things like that. That's how things, even in Christianity, things are that way. Even if you go to Catholic churches in Russia or in Africa, they're still Catholic, and they may vary in how they look and how they feel. They got because one is lived by people in African regions, one is lived by people in Russian regions, different experiences, different political leanings, but they're unified. They're the same.
Yeah, I just was in Ukraine,
Right.
and if you spoke Ukrainian or Russian and you were at the service there, their service was very much like one of our services. They had worship, they had liturgy, they had dance, they had a message, they had an oneg. It was Messianic Judaism, but it was Messianic Judaism Ukrainian.
Right.
It was slightly different, and there were differences in what they did as far as how they dressed, how they acted, those kind of things. But the unifying doctrines
Right.
were the same. The unifying feel was the same, even though it was entirely across the world. And so that's something that can be,
Right.
while we still have variances
Right.
on things that, even simple things like your congregation and ours. The liturgy is very similar, the worship is very similar, but the format is completely different. Mm-hmm. You interpose your liturgy with your worship. We have our liturgy or our worship and then our liturgy.
We're on a block schedule.
Right, we're more block schedule. You guys are more whatever it is. But it's both recognizably Messianic Jewish, and it is comfortable for somebody from our congregation to come to your congregation back and forth, even though there are differences, because the doctrines are the same.
Right.
The liturgy is the same. It's just done a little differently.
Right. And that's what, and again, we use the Baptists a lot just because they're so prevalent. But, if I go to a Baptist church, I'm going to get a Baptist church. And again, it's different because we're so close and we're related to each other, as either friends and or family with Bradam and CMC. But I've been to Messianic synagogues where it was like, oh, this was very different from, what I had previously understood Messianic Judaism to be. And so, again, it's the strength that the church has of, if you're going to call yourself Southern Baptist, here's what that looks like. And, eventually we ourselves as a movement, if there is going to be any progression, has to get to where when you ask a Baptist, what is Messianic Judaism? They can tell you in a ballpark answer that doesn't have a wide spectrum of answers. But, they can throw the ball and it lands in the park, not throw the ball and it lands in one of many parks.
Well, I hope that this has been somewhat helpful to you, and I hope that we as a movement will take advantage of some of the opportunities that there are within the world outside of the world of faith outside of our four walls, to take some examples from the Christian world, and even if we don't involve the Christian people as much, to at least take the strengths that they provide to use as examples to help strengthen each other, to do as Rabbi David said, recognize our weaknesses and reach out on our own, but also to look for opportunities to help. I know that in our congregation, for instance, we'll walk around the parking lot and we'll look especially for the senior citizens, especially the female senior citizens or the single, and say, do they need new tires? Is there something going on with it? Something we can recognize, because we know they're not always going to come to us. So there's times where you proactively look for help. There's other times where people have to ask for help. And we're not mind readers. And we can't blame the organizations we're part of for not being mind readers. And like I said, there was a period of time where I struggled with intense fear that I should have reached out. And I can't blame the organizations that I'm a part of for not reaching out to me if they had no clue it was happening. So both of those sides need to be there, but the structure for that needs to be established so that we can do that. And anyhow, we hope this is a blessing. If it was, let us know. Connect with us. And if you have something you'd like us to talk about in the future, let us know. Shalom.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.